We'll give a second for people to start tuning in.
Usually get people to just tune in just like that. They just start to come in.
That's right. Yep, people just start joining because right now it's live on the page.
And how do they know it's live on the page?
They can see it. It appears.
But they have to be on the page.
That's right. And we share it in many groups as well. And so here we go. We have, and so welcome everybody who's joining us today. We're very happy to have with us today our special guest, Les Leopold. And he is the lifelong labor leader, co-founder of the Labor Institute, and author most recently of Runaway Inequality, which I actually have right here. I was fortunate to get, so I can show off an activist guide to economic justice. And Les, it's great to have you on.
Thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
And so, Les, it's a special pleasure to talk to you because we recently had Eve on our call, and she led a training on our national weekly call and of Runaway Inequality, and the reaction to that was terrific. And so, I wonder for everybody who was not on the call, if you could share. Now we're live to hundreds of people on social media, and so I wonder if you could share what was the premise of Runaway Inequality, and what inspired you to write the book, and what do you see as the fundamental problem that you discuss in the book?
Well, I actually was driven to writing it because my son was doing an internship with some immigrant worker centers in New York. And he's walking around New York on his own for the first time, and he's walking over bodies sleeping on the street. He comes home, he goes, "What's going on here? I thought we were the richest country in the history of the world. Why are all these people sleeping on the street?" So at the time I was looking for a book project, and I started to work on that issue, and that issue took me to many other issues. The next thing you know, I realized that what's been going on for the last year is this incredible increase in inequality. And when I looked at it more carefully, I noticed that, in fact, it tied together all the many, many different issues, all the way from racial justice to the environment, labor issues. It tied them all together, that they were interconnected through runaway inequality. So it became a very ambitious project. I started to test various chapters on Facebook and Huffington Post, alternate various websites. I was getting a good reaction. Next thing that happened is I get a call from the Communication Workers of America. They had these volunteer political action folks who were Verizon workers. And they said, "Could you come in and do 5 half-day trainings with them on movement building?" I said, "What's that?" And this is before Bernie. They said, "What's that?" They said, "Well, whatever you want it to be, go ahead." I said, "Can I use the chapters of the book as a template?" They said, "Sure." So I went in there and we went through the chapters, and the response was unbelievably enthusiastic. I mean, I've written 3 other books. I've never had a response like this. And by the end of it, they wanted thousands of books for their own local unions. But most importantly, they wanted to be trained as trainers. And they wanted to spread the word out to help build the movement. What would it take to get enough people involved in the education so that we could actually build an educational infrastructure for a broad movement, modeled after the progressive populists of the 1880s. They had 6,000 trainers in the field, basically doing a Bernie-like rap about runaway inequality. And we figure we need 30,000, and we need another 29,500. So we're off and running. The book kind of took off in lots of bulk sales to various different groups. We're in our 3rd printing. We've got 50,000 books out. All the revenues from the book go back into the campaign. I don't take any royalties from this project. It's a way to help reinforce the training process. So now our goal is to introduce as many people as possible to the idea of runaway inequality. There's like 100 charts and graphs in the book to help people understand how it works, how we got here, and what it takes to get out of here. And then to encourage them, we encourage them to go to our website, runawayinequality.org, all one word, and to sign up, to volunteer to become a trainer. And then we work with a large number of groups to set up train the trainer projects. We have a large one with the Communication of Workers of America nationally. We have a one in New Jersey that has a bunch of community and unions involved, sponsored by the teachers union. And they have 30, 40 different trainers. Citizen Action New York State has a bunch of trainers. We have incredible programs going on now in North Carolina. Wilmington, North Carolina turns out to be a hotbed for this training. The Detroit area has got a growing network of trainers. And we really hope that your movement will become involved. If you have 50,000 members, you're going to need a couple hundred trainers for sure. And we'd be glad to help you get there. We don't charge any money. We don't raise any money. We're not an organization. We're an infrastructure. One of the pieces that we think is necessary to build the kind of movement we need to reverse runaway inequality. It's a very, very big problem. As your folks already know, we can't do anything about anything until we build a large mass movement, and that the likes of which we haven't seen before. We got a taste of it with Occupy Wall Street. We got another taste of it with Bernie, and now we have to keep building on that, because I think people are ready to are angry about runaway inequality. They're ready to take on Wall Street, but we have to give them a vehicle, a platform, an educational process, and then real campaigns to get from here to there.
That's a great point, Les. And I love the comparison back to the progressive movement of the late 1800s, because, like I mentioned to you earlier, I think that in so many ways we are in a second Gilded Age. We find ourselves in that level with the same level of inequality, and increasing levels of political corruption as well. And so I wonder, do you think that people now are sufficiently aware and are sufficiently recognize that problem? What do you think is the balance now between education and versus people who are already kind of on that playing field and ready to take action and to address it? And I wonder, what do you think also, what are the solutions? I wonder if you could tell us also about the solutions.
Right. Let me share with you who we target. We target the kinds of people that were for Bernie and then either didn't vote or maybe even voted for Trump. Half the steelworkers voted for Trump. More than half the steelworkers were supporters of Bernie. So we're dealing with people that are kind of confused. They're angry. They're not quite sure entirely what's wrong. They heard Bernie's message and were attracted to it. Then they sort of thought, well, maybe Trump will turn it all upside down. They didn't want to go with Hillary, the establishment, but they don't have a framework. They don't have a way to put it all together. And we are finding that this framework of runaway inequality is incredibly potent for reaching those people. The Communication Workers of America folks that we have as trainers, we got about 40 of them that are active and who are building networks all over the place. And those are the kinds of people that they're reaching out to. It would be like, imagine if your 50,000 folks started not just collecting people who already agreed, but the people who are sort of interested but don't completely agree yet or are confused. That's why you need the education. So I think the balance right now, I think for the foreseeable future, well, look, we need to do both. We need to round up the convinced and we need to reach out to people who could be convinced. And I think the reaching out to people who could be convinced requires an open educational process. We do all our training in small groups. People kind of have discussions looking at factual information. They get a chance to really work stuff through. And you'd be amazed at what could happen in 6 or 8 hours with folks. And nothing beats the live interaction amongst people. It's a beautiful thing to behold. And they're becoming real fighters, real movement builders. And that's the goal. The trainers become apostles of movement building. I'll tell you a very interesting story about. There's one Communication Workers of America local on Staten Island, which is a very conservative place in New York, and they were out on strike, and a couple of those guys are trainers. They were out on strike, and a couple of other folks from immigrant worker centers who we work with in a different project, but had seen some of the runaway inequality training, had gone over and supported them on the picket line. And they started talking, and they said, wait, let's get together and start doing training around Staten Island together. And let's set up an organization. And by the way, it's a very strong Bernie local. And they called it Sustainable Staten Island. And they're doing runaway inequality training all together, immigrant workers and basically white working class people on Staten Island. And so that's an incredible development. That happened without us intervening at all, other than providing the initial training. So that they're trying to reach out precisely to those conservative white working class folks on Staten Island. They're having some success. Imagine if we were doing that in 5 or 10,000 counties across the country. Just imagine how potent it could become. Talking to people that don't already agree with us, and reaching out to them and engaging them in a dialogue. We would be welcomed. It's like a breath of fresh air for people to get engaged this way. So that's what we're trying to sell. That's what we're trying to get people to go to runawayinequality.org. If they want to be a trainer, they write yes. Otherwise, they just get on our mailing list. And like I said, we want them to donate money to you, not to us. Our book sales and support from like the CWA and others are taking care of us. We don't have to worry. You don't have to worry about that.
And it's a terrific book, and I encourage everyone to read it as well. I picked up my first copy at the People's Summit last year, where it came with the package. I was happy to get it. And Les, I wanted to ask you too. So, as Movement for a People's Party, our view is that the Democrats and Republicans are so entrenched that the kinds of changes that we're talking about, they're so entrenched with their donors. They're so, and they even take money from the same corporations, the same big donors at the same time, and so it's no surprise when parties that are taking money from the pharmaceutical industry and that are deeply entrenched with them are then opposing single-payer healthcare. And then when parties which are taking money from the military-industrial complex, for example, from military contractors, are then so prone to starting wars abroad, or when parties that are taking money from private corporations that are, whether they're writing textbooks or whether they support voucher kinds of private education, are then supporting that kinds of are supporting charter schools, and privatized education. And so just on issue after issue, it is the money in politics that is preventing progress on any of these things. And given that the Democratic and Republican parties are so entrenched with that money, they spent I believe it was $800 million in the 2016 election cycle just on a handful of contractors, just 5 contractors. And so how is it that do you think that those changes can be achieved inside the Democratic and Republican parties? How do you think that we work with an alternative? Yeah, please.
I did a lot of work with the Labor Party when it was operating back 10, 15 years ago, and the slogan that I sort of donated to them was, "The bosses have 2 parties, we need one of our own." And
that was from you.
Yeah, I was sort of a ghostwriter for it a lot, and there's just no question about it that both political parties have been driving forward runaway inequality. It was no accident that Hillary took all that money from Wall Street. It's no accident that the Cory Booker Democrats and the Gillibrand and all up and down the line are going to be are deeply entwined with large corporations and Wall Street. They see it as, realistic politics. But I actually think that a majority of Americans want something different. Building it is very, very difficult. We don't want to reelect Trump in the process, right? So it makes it hard to figure out exactly how to do it, when to do it. The Labor Party effort grew out of a period when it looked like there was a resurgent labor movement, but now I think it's pretty clear it has to be broader than the labor movement. It's got to be the enthusiastic people that you helped organize in the Sanders campaign. It's exactly those people who gave the $27 donations by the millions that are ready to build something. We have to give them a structure. In our training, we point out 4 things are necessary to build a sustainable movement. One is a common agenda and a common analysis. We think runaway inequality provides the framework for a common analysis. We think the common agenda is just about there. I think Bernie field tested it for us. And by the way, we took a similar agenda like that and bought a SurveyMonkey poll, and it was incredibly popular. All the planks, all the opposite of what you just talked about. The doing something about military spending, getting the pharmaceutical industry, out of healthcare, basically cutting down healthcare, Medicare for all, free higher education, which, by the way, also grew out of proposals we launched in the Labor Party. Bernie stole that one from us, and we're very proud of it. Though we could get an agenda, I've been going around doing workshops, asking people all over the country. I must have done 50 at least in the last year, and folks pretty much say the same thing. All kinds of working people, community people are saying about the same thing. I don't think that's the hard part. The second thing is we do need this vast educational infrastructure. There is no substitute for live communication, whether it be like this or whether it be face-to-face, but face-to-face in a room with 30, 40 people is really powerful. But we need lots of people to run those workshops, learn how to run them. It's all doable. Lay trainers, you don't have to be an economist. It's the second thing, and that's my pay grade. That's what I'm working on. The third thing, though, is what you're working on. We need a local state and national organization dedicated to reversing runaway inequality. A People's Party for something, which is a world that reduces runaway inequality. I want to go to Peoria, Patterson, Pasadena, Pensacola. I want to be able to walk in as a dues-paying member of that organization and fight to reverse runaway inequality at the local and national level. The fourth thing we need, though, and this is the toughest one of them all, is it's in our heads. We need to believe that we can build this mass movement. And a lot of people are skeptical because we haven't seen anything like this in our lifetimes. So we don't think it can be done. And so what people do is retreat into their issue silos. We've got racial justice silos. We've got environmental silos. Everybody thinks their issue is the existential issue, labor survival issues. And people end up getting a very, very talented fighters in their silos. So what we're trying to do is make those silos porous. So you can be in your silo, but you have to also be a movement builder. You have to believe that a broad movement, the kind of which you are actually trying to build right now, is something we all have to build wherever we are, whatever our issue is. So that's the message for movement building that we're trying to get out there. And then we try to recruit people into the training apparatus, but we're mostly trying to get them to believe that they can be movement builders wherever they go. I don't know if you saw Eve Majeur's emails now that she sends out. Bottom, she has her name, she says movement builder underneath her name, because she works for Netgear. I mean, she's a trainer at Netgear. She works in Silicon Valley, but she's a movement builder. Wherever she goes, she's a movement builder. And that's what we're trying to train our trainers to do. And, it's not a hard sell. They get it. They've internalized it. They all talk about silos and breaking them down now. And the next step is for your organization to become large enough, vibrant enough. We all can join it, create chapters, and start to build that movement that fights to reverse runaway inequality. In New Jersey, by the way, we have a very good opportunity now because the governor says he's in favor of a public bank. And public banks, a people's bank, a people's party for a people's bank, is absolutely necessary to create public institutions that challenge Wall Street. Yeah, I was just doing some research today. $14 billion of taxpayer cash is sitting in New Jersey money is sitting basically in Wall Street banks and in Wall Street investments. That could become the capital base for a public bank, the way it is in North Dakota. The Bank of North Dakota is, by the way, the most profitable bank in the country. Its top salary is like $300,000 a year, not $30 million a year. And all the profits from the bank go back into the state coffers. They have programs like for every $100,000 they loan out, the recipient, the business has to create one new permanent job in the state of North Dakota. They, for first generation students and lower income students, they pay their application fees to any college in North Dakota. They have no, if you take a loan from the Bank of North Dakota and you live in North Dakota, there's no upfront 3% administrative fee. It's zero. So there's a lot of stuff we can do. Campaigns like that are going to emerge around the country. And hopefully that's one of the things that'll be on your agenda to help fight runaway inequality.
No, we do.
We're very excited to be able to work with you. So we were talking about before, we want to build, we build these trainer networks with other groups. It's not our network. It becomes the people's network. We're not an organization. We're an educational infrastructure. We want the trainers to support each other. On the website, you know, we're posting things of what people are doing in different places. Eve just sent something in. Some people in North Carolina just sent something in. We'll be sharing ideas. We're going to try, we have a person coming on full-time starting in June. We're going around, there's a map on our website, shows where all the would-be trainers are. We're going to go around and cluster them and run train-the-trainer programs, either 1 day or 2 day programs. 2 days are best. CWA does 3 days, but we're cutting it down to 2, where people get up and after the first hour or so of introduction, they actually get up and train each other for the rest of the time. And then we help them pick up the tips of how to do it better and better, get conveyed without putting anybody down. We don't do any negative criticism. It's a very safe space. And this training is a safe space for people to basically say what they really feel and see if we can't rearrange how they view the world a little bit so they can see runaway inequality is a central problem that ties us together. We need to build a movement, a people's movement to take it on. That's what we're doing with runawayinequality.org. And we don't want you to become a part of it. We want to become a part of you and help develop a couple of hundred trainers for your ever-growing network.
We just released our platform draft, and we'll be actually voting to ratify it on our national call next week for anyone who wants to join us.
Great.
And public banking is featured on it as well as something that's very important. And it gets to something, I think, a broader point, that is that the solutions are out there. It's to our problems, to economic inequality, to all of the problems, basically that we face. We have progressive solutions. Bernie put a lot of them on the table, and so that I think is one thing that is part of the character of where we stand nationally. And then another aspect of it, though, that we're very fortunate to have is that people actually agree with those solutions. When you go down the list, like you said, you did the poll, and there's opinion polls all over the place, which are constantly affirming this, single payer healthcare, the Medicare for all, free public college, reducing inequality, getting money out of politics, addressing climate change, postal and public banking.
Let me share one with you that'll blow your mind.
Yeah.
There's a poll done. It's a couple years old now. And they asked people, 1,500 people, what do they think the pay gap should be between an average worker and a top CEO of a large company? They asked them what they thought it was. And they had it broken down by age, by education, and by political affiliation. They had like 5 political categories, from strong Republican to strong Democrat, et cetera. So the average person thought the gap was about 45 to 60 to 1, which is what it was in 1970. It's now 800 to 1. So people think it's 800 to 1. They think it's 45 to 60 to 1. So that's where some education could take place. There's room for education. But catch this. They asked them what they think it ought to be. Strong Democrats said 5 to 1. Strong Republicans said 12 to 1 for an average of 7 to 1. It's 800 to 1 now. It's actually 800 to 1. People want it to be on average 7 to 1. And you know what the ratio is at the Bank of North Dakota? Amazing. Exactly 7 to 1.
Wow.
So in terms of this, it reinforces what you said. People are there. They need a framework and an institution to connect with. That reinforces once they see that other people. I mean, that's how the populist movement was falling apart in the 1880s. It was collapsing until they sent out these educators. And next thing they knew, these chapters were forming, and because people already agreed that they had to take the country back at that point. It was small farmers, black and white, mostly Midwest and South, getting crushed by Wall Street debts and the railroads, the stockyards, the grain elevators. They wanted public control over all those things. They wanted to nationalize telegraph, railroads, so that and they wanted public banks. It took them a while. They didn't win everything, but they legitimized control of these large private financial interests. It took all the way to the New Deal till we got some serious control, and then we, the last 40 years, we gave up the control. Now we got to have to fight to get it back again. But people were there. I agree with you. People are there,
and they're there now. Exactly. And that's why in the big picture, the case that we're making is that people are there. We know the solutions. What we're missing now is a vehicle. We need a vehicle through which to implement these things. And that's a political party. Exactly.
We need the vehicle. I'm gung-ho for that. Everywhere I go, I'm telling folks, they've got to figure out, like I've been talking, there's 9,000 indivisible chapters. 9,000. That's a lot of people in motion. I'm in New Jersey 11, where Frelinghuysen, a very conservative Republican, just stepped down because of the pressure from our indivisible group. He actually stepped down the day they announced I was speaking at one of their forums. So I take complete credit for this conservative Republican stepping down because he got too frightened. But the reason he really stepped down is the Women's March. They had 15,000 people came out for in a town in his district. 15,000 showed up in Morristown, New Jersey. But you guys have to be there as well. In other words, those 9,000 groups have no common agenda, have no common organization. They just have, tens of thousands of wonderful people there looking for ultimately a home. So I'm hoping you can reach out to them. I'm telling labor people, you should be at all these meetings. It's incredible who's showing up. Your friends and neighbors that you never thought were political. All of a sudden, the room, I went to, in 1 week, I went to there were 4 meetings, 1,000 people showed up at these 4 meetings in our little congressional district. I wish you guys were there. I bet you there are plenty of Bernie people there, but there was you could have gotten up and said, hey, join us. We want to link up with you. And because, the floor was open. So I'm hoping that that becomes part of your movement building agenda. And that's part of our educational agenda. Eve's trying to reach out to them on the West Coast. I'm trying to go to as many meetings as I can get invited to share with them, basically the analysis that's in the book, which we think is pretty potent. So I'm hoping that's where you guys go. Pick up all these groups, bring them in.
That's absolutely what we're working on. We have state, regional organizers all over the country who are reaching out to groups, going to their meetings, working, collaborating in events.
What do you have in New Jersey? What do you have in New Jersey?
Oh, we have some organizers in New Jersey. We don't have a chapter there yet. But the objective is to do just what you're saying, is to tell people, we need a vehicle through which we can implement all of these solutions, which we already agree are necessary. And so I wonder, since you were involved in the Labor Party, and you saw, the construction of that. And I wonder, what do you think are the prospects for something like that, for organized labor to support an independent alternative? And how do you see such a thing coming about too? You know, how do we create the vehicle, the electoral vehicle, through which we can actually implement these solutions that we all support at this point?
I'll tell you, it's one of the toughest projects. I think the trick is to get a very sizable group before you try to become the third party in any election, because you don't want to be the spoiler, right? We don't want to put a bunch of conservative Republicans in indefinitely. So that becomes a tricky formation. Where labor's going to go, I think there are several very progressive unions that are on your wavelength. And then there's a lot that'll never be on your wavelength. There's a whole bunch that will never bolt from the Democrats because they feel they want to be insiders. And then there's some that are even more conservative than that. So I think the enthusiasm for this has got to come from the Bernie type forces, which were a few unions and millions of citizens at large. I think you're doing exactly the right thing. I think when it becomes complicated, that's why I'm urging you to do education, because once you start intervening electorally, you have to win. You have to win. You can't just be a protest vote, because the protest vote will elect the Republican. You either have to be in a district where the Democrat always wins, so that, whoever wins the primary is going to win, or you have to be big enough to just be the third party that wins, bigger than the Democrats and Republicans. So you probably have more experience than I do from your more recent experience than I do from your Bernie stuff. The Labor Party tried very hard not to be electoral, but that leads to another problem, which is, what does a party do that's not electoral, right? And so people were not satisfied with the campaigns because they were itching to get involved electorally, which Bernie gave people an opportunity to do it, but as you said, through the Democratic Party. All right, so that is the conundrum right there. How do you give electoral expression, or is it going to be like the Tea Party, where you challenge inside the party, but you don't break out of the party? You become the progressive force within the party for a while until you're big enough to jump out and win. Third parties are tough in America. They just are tough. But look, getting people mobilized and building an educational infrastructure is all to the good. You can't go wrong there.
As far as something that I've wondered is, organized labor is very much at the center, and should be, of any effort for independent politics or a major third party. And
there's only It's only a handful. There are only a handful of unions that will.
That's right. That's right. Only a handful now, but it is still the biggest bastion of organization on the left, which the Democrats have ironically participated in leading to to a reduction in members over many decades, a reduction in unionization from a high. It used to be, I think, 35% in the 40s.
We've sat down with labor people and laid that out, saying, hey, these are the people, the Democrats are the people that are screwing you. They're the ones that are destroying you. What's going on here? They say, yeah, they're destroying us, but we can talk to them.
Right.
So worse. The other side's worse. We have to always stay with the Democrats. Let me tell you a story of the steelworkers, which is really interesting. Yeah. For 40 years, the steelworkers have been training their own people to fight against bad trade deals, right? And the way trade deals have passed for the last 40 years has been the Republicans plus enough Democrats to get it through. So you could always go back to the members and say, vote for the Democrat, because even though some of them voted for the bad trade deal, the Republicans are worse. Till this time, where Trump outflanked them and just attacked the trade deals. First time a Republican has ever done that. And so like lemmings, the rank and file just went to Trump because of the trade deals. And the union didn't know what to do. They were like, they couldn't talk the membership out of it. And one of the reasons, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, heavy steel could have been the difference in the election. So that's a classic example where because they didn't have a progressive party they could really support, their members ended up trailing off to Trump just because of the trade deal. Because they knew Hillary was a free trader, right? She was clearly a free trader. Had Bernie been on the ballot, they would have overwhelmingly supported him. So can you guys become in a sense, the Bernie structure, or is Bernie? And is that what ends up drawing people? Very tough. It's a very tough, you have a very difficult problem ahead. But you know what? You guys are young. You can figure it out.
That's a great point, though, Les, and that is something really interesting. And that's whether there's the media often treats it as if what happened during the Bernie campaign was as a result of Bernie kind of as a figure, himself, as if it's a cult of personality around who Bernie is. I don't think that's true.
I agree. I think
it's actually Bernie is the latest in a manifestation in a long line of growing discontent with the establishment. And Occupy Wall Street was the exact same thing. And so it's not necessarily that Bernie created, this new kind of progressive impulse or this progressive movement inside in the country. It's rather that he gave voice to existing beliefs, that were already there and hadn't found a representation before.
I go around the country and do these talks. I start off and I ask, why did Trump win? And people say all the usual things.
He ran as Bernie, basically, in a lot of ways.
Well, they say all these things, Russia, xenophobia, racism, sexism, and so on. And I say, look, okay, all that's true. Let me add two more things. One, runaway inequality. There was a reaction from the right and from the left. I think what made Bernie, look, Bernie's been saying the same thing for 45 years. And nobody listened until this time. Why? Because the runaway inequality has become so extreme that people are really upset about it. And Bernie tapped into it. Unfortunately, so did Trump. The second reason, though, I think Trump won is our side, progressives, are incredibly poorly organized. We saw we've got all these people splintered on different issues. We've got people who are colonized by the Democratic Party, all the stuff that you saw in the campaign. You saw it like live and in living color close up. And all these, what we try to tell people or get people to see is this happened on our watch. It's not like, all these other people, the Koch brothers and all, they did all these bad things. This happened on our watch. So we have to reflect on what's wrong with the way we've organized so that we've been losing. And it's like Alcoholics Anonymous. We have to get people to first recognize that, all the feel-good stuff you put in your fundraising proposals and tell yourself, it's not, what's happening is the right is capturing more and more political power. We had a couple of opportunities to flip that around. Occupy Wall Street was a missed opportunity, and Bernie was a missed opportunity. And now I'm hoping you become the opportunity that this is not a missed opportunity. But we have to create we have to realize that it takes really good, smart organizing and millions of people self-funding, not relying on the progressive the liberal billionaires. Forget about them. It's got to be small donations, millions of people mobilized in chapters, which is kind of happening with all these different movements. It's just going to take very smart, good organizers like yourselves to pull it together. I mean, look, there's Working Families Party out there. There's Our Revolution. We've got a lot of proto attempts. Somehow, I think at some point we have to have a grand alliance that brings all those people together in a dues-paying structure. That's what's beautiful about what you're doing. That list of Bernie people, the 4 million names, that's gold. And you're sort of recreating that. People are willing to give small donations to you. That's the way we have to go. You got to get from 50,000 to 5 million. That's what we want to help you do. 5 million people involved. Then I think you'll become the centerpiece for a new movement. And then you can have the discussions about when to get in and when to get out. Should we get in these primaries? Should we field our separate independent candidates? but it'll feel, lots of people involved in that decision, and you'll feel very empowered to help lead that. That's what we want to help you do.
And independent politics, and speaking about what you bring up with our own history, independent politics, looking at that, is something that has led, has been at the forefront of achieving basically every progressive policy that we cherish today.
I'd like you to read, take a look at Lawrence Goodwin's book called The Populist Moment. It's really the definitive book on the progressive populists, not in the 1880s, 1890s. There's a very critical period where they're growing in power. I think it's 1892, or is it 1896? They jump into the Democratic Party too soon. They move in too soon, and they get captured and kind of their energy gets dissipated. Where they stayed more independent, like they did in North Dakota, like they did in Minnesota, they had a far bigger impact on changing the real policy, really changing the way things were run, getting some control over finance and over big business. I'd love for you to look at that. I'm sure you would give it fresh eyes. The book was written, I think, in the 50s. It's really well done. It's scholarly but accessible, and takes you right into the dilemma that you're going to be walking into again. If you become as big and as powerful as the populists, you'll have the same moment that they had, and hopefully you'll make the right choice. They jumped for power too soon, and lost. They went with William Jennings Bryan, who was not a populist. He was just he was basically the mainstream Democrat at the time, and they went with him when they could have held back.
Right. And then he folded into the Democratic Party as well.
He was the Democratic Party, and then they got their clocks clean.
Yeah. Well, last question, Les. I wonder, with given how important labor is, to the left and to any prospects on the independent left, I wonder, how do you think that? Do you think that automation, that the kind of traditional organized labor model of unions is something that is sustainable over time? I mean, I'm sure you've seen the studies, of course, that half of people, it's projected in the next 15 years, half of jobs can be automated in the United States. And so what does that do to the labor sector? How do they, how does it survive? How do we organize in a new way when the nature of work changes so drastically that you have artificial intelligence and machine intelligence capable of performing not just manufacturing jobs, but moving into the service industries, moving also even into creative jobs as well? I mean, the things that they're capable of doing today, paralegal work,
Let's do some comparative work. Let's look at some countries that have a high level of automation technology. Northern Europe, France, Germany, Denmark, Sweden, Norway. Unions are 10 times stronger there than here. Why is that? Automation doesn't seem to be, people still work. My entire life, I've been hearing this automation story. There were commissions on this in the late 50s about automation was going to destroy all these jobs and wipe out all these jobs. And there has been ever increasing automation, but people are still working. We still have, people are still working, and they need to be organized. It's just much easier to organize in other countries than it is here. I don't think that what you're talking about is the critical factor. I don't think that's the factor. The factor is which unions really want to go out and work with the new workforce, immigrants all over the place. This was the same argument that was going on in the 20s and 30s. The established labor movement did not want to organize immigrants except for the needle trades and the clothing workers. This is why John L. Lewis formed the CIO in 1936, was because the old craft unions didn't want to have the unskilled workers in their unions. And he started a whole new labor movement. There are unions now that are really trying to work with immigrant workers, both documented and undocumented. The ones that are figuring that out, That's where unions are going to grow. And they're going to grow. Graduate school workers are organizing into the auto workers now. You've got all kinds of people who want to be in unions. They're being prevented. The ones that are really by various labor laws, but the energy has to come from the progressive unions. There are a handful and that are really reaching out. And that's what the core of a new labor movement will look like. That's another area that there could be an unexpected explosion at some point. I think it's what's going to happen. Here's my prediction.
Please.
People's movement, something like what you're doing, like Occupy, Bernie, you, Our Revolution, Indivisible, starts to form and people get in motion. And when they get in motion, they also start to say, I don't want to be treated like crap on my job. I don't want to be getting, $7 an hour. And they start organizing, they start running towards unions. There's a great story from the 1930s or early 1940s. This one guy writes in his diary, today I organized 12 local unions. He didn't organize 12 local unions. 12 different groups came in and said, we have like 50 people, can we sign up and be part of your union? And he issued them a charter. When people start getting organized, they run towards what they need. And what they're going to need is protection at the workplace. And if those same unions are engaged in a people's movement at the same time, they become even more attractive. And the unions that are reaching out, Postal Workers Union, Communication Workers, Transportation Workers Union, some of the AFL-CIO councils in Buffalo and Washington State, around the country, they're the ones that have the energy, and it'll be very, very obvious. They'll be partners of yours as our people's movement builds. So I think there's hope there. I wouldn't worry about automation. That's not the big problem. The big problem is what we call financial strip mining. The real problem is Wall Street extracting wealth from our workplaces, from our communities, from students, from their families, from healthcare. That's a gargantuan cancer that we have to address.
And the regulatory regime as well, like the Janus decision as well, the regulatory regime that's coming down. The prospect of
good unions are prepared for that. The ones that are they're mobilizing their members to get them to sign up anyway. They're working with a bunch of unions already that are incredibly well prepared. It's very impressive what they're doing. They're not going to throw in the towel and say, oh my God, we've lost it. They're getting mobilized. But the energy for that mobilization is going to come from the sparks, women's movement, from what you're doing, from Indivisible, from Bernie. Those are the sparks that get people to realize, to feel, if we get mobilized, we might be able to actually really do something. That's what I mean about that change of the head. We can actually build a mass movement big enough, strong enough to take back the country. It's going to take some real work, but anytime I see young people involved, I feel very hopeful. If you have to rely on us, you're in trouble. I think we're actually very well suited to produce the educational infrastructure, but you're going to have to be the engine of this thing and give us groups to work with.
Well, Les, it's been great. Been great talking to you. And I want to give you an opportunity if there's anything else you want to say. Anything you want to leave.
If you want a bunch of books, if you want a bunch of books to help you get going, let me know. We'll get you some for cost or for nothing. We want to help you get it out there. So if you need a bunch of, like a starter kit, need a couple hundred books to get you going, to share with people, to see whether you want to get involved in the education, let me know. We'll get you a bunch. I can ship them out.
Okay, thank you. All right, yeah. So everyone hears that. You have the prospect of getting your own free copy of Runaway Inequality.
And go to runawayinequality.org. Sign up so we know that you want to be a trainer.
Les, thank you. For imparting. Those of us who are younger might be out there organizing. As well. But I mean, it's great to be receiving and being the beneficiary, of all of the wisdom that people like you bring.
When it comes down to it, we are peers. We are peers. We are comrades in this fight together. That's what we are.
Thank you, Les. I want to also thank our social media team, Karina, and everybody who helps you find this interview and helped you reach it and get Les's great message and his wisdom today. And the whole Movement for People's Party team. you can join us, help us build a chapter. We're building chapters across the country now. And that you can join us at forapeoplesparty.org and follow us back also to our Facebook page. And of course, come and join us tomorrow when we'll be ratifying and deliberating our platform.
Do me a favor, send me a copy. Send me a copy.
I'll be sure to. Yeah, I think you'll like it. We'll love your feedback on it.
Will do. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Les, and everyone have a great night.
Bye, everybody.